Hi, I'm Lenise Brothers, a registered nutritionist, women's health, hormone, and menstrual cycle coach, and the founder of Eat, Love, Move, a nutrition and well-being practice. This is the Period Story Podcast, where in each episode, I sit down with a guest to talk about their period story. We get behind some of the myths and misconceptions about periods and so much more. Now, on to today's guest. I'm so excited for you to hear my conversation with Melissa Ramos, the founder of Sexy Food Therapy. Melissa and I had a fantastic conversation about her healing journey through ovarian cysts, very heavy periods, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, thyroid nodules, and fibroids. And of course, we talked about her very first period. She is a very inspiring woman, so listen on to hear our chat. I'm so excited for you to be here. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here and to talk all about periods and more.
Yeah. So this is the question I always start with. Tell me the story of your first period.
Well, I was 13 years old, and it feels like such a cliche story because I was in class, and it was art class in Mr. Nelson's class. And of course I bled through my pants, and I had a windbreaker because it was the times you wore a windbreaker. You know what I'm talking about. So, you know when you're born when, right? Yeah. So anyways, I remember wrapping it around my waist, and I was mortified. And my friend put a bunch of those really awful paper towels in school. It comes in one big roll.
Yeah.
Ripped it, and then put it down. And she said, just go, put the thing around your waist. Went home, and I didn't come back to class that day because I was mortified. And I went home, and my sister was home, who's 7 years older than me. And she's like, you got your period. And I was like, I don't know, there's something wrong with me. I was terrified. I had no idea what was going on. And she was the one who told me okay, so, there's menstrual pads and there's tampons and stuff. And I guess because there's such a huge age gap, she would teach me a lot of this stuff before even my mom got to it. My mom's awesome, but just before she got to it. And I remember that evening, I was sitting for dinner, and my dad, I don't know what I had said, nothing about my period because I wouldn't tell my dad about it, but I said something, and my dad goes, well, you're all grown up now, aren't you? Right. And my sister and I replied back, and I remember going, you have no idea. And my sister started laughing. He's like, what are you guys laughing about? Right. Because he had no idea what we were talking about. But the great thing was when I did go back to school, nobody made fun of me. And I actually was really terrified that the boys or something would say something because I bled all over my chair. And I was like, oh my God, that, they're going to make fun of me when I go back to school. But no one said anything. And so I think I was really, really lucky about that. But that was my first period story. I was 13 years old, which I feel like is much later than a lot of women are getting their periods these days.
Yeah, it's later than a lot of women that I've spoken to, but for the age that you are, I feel like that's actually around the average age. So what's really interesting to me is that you were 13 and you said that you weren't sure what was happening to you. When did you learn about these things in school? I know you said your sister told you about what was happening, but what about in school? What was the health ed like for you?
We didn't even learn about it. I'm kind of in that camp where I believe that kids should be learning about even sex ed earlier than they should. People say they're too young. And I'm like, but there's so much shame, I think, wrapped up in the idea of bleeding or having sex or anything. And I didn't really learn about any of that. I didn't, and even sex ed, we didn't really start talking about it more so until I remember being in high school. So I wasn't learning about anything about periods. I knew about them from, my mom or my sister, and I knew my mother had really heavy periods, and My mother is Polish born, but grew up in Brazil since she was 4. So she essentially considers herself Brazilian. And she had such heavy periods that she used to tell me that she would make her own her own pads, because she was raised in a very, very, very poor part of a city in Brazil where a lot of people immigrated after the war. They were refugees from World War II. And she would say to me that she would make her own pads because they were really poor, and she would have that, but she bled so heavy all the time. And she would try to race home to go get some more pads because maybe she didn't have enough or something. And she used to tell me that there were birds or something that were on the side of the road. She'd always carry a stick with her because they try to nip at your legs where she'd have stockings on. I know these crazy stories, but I remember her always having really heavy periods, and my sister had very heavy periods. So I just was really used to it. That almost felt like the norm, that I kind of always expected that was going to happen to me. And sure enough, it did.
So your periods were really heavy. So when you say heavy, what does that mean for you?
Oh gosh, they were I just remember talking to girlfriends and they're like, oh, I get my period for 3 days. And I'm like, oh, what is that like? What is that like? Because I was at that time, I would get them for a full 7. But I would probably have 3 days where it was insanely heavy, where I would be, super absorbency plus tampon from OB, which was it's very actually that tampon, which, I don't use those now because I know how bad and how toxic those commercial tampons are. And they were without the applicator. And I remember how hard it was to get that specific one because they didn't sell them everywhere, but they were the most absorbent you could possibly get. So I'd wear a super absorbency plus tampon and an overnight maxi, and I'd have to change both in an hour.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And so overnight I would have to set an alarm. And I think that it was also hard during the day because you're moving and, when you're sitting and all of a sudden you get up and you're that rush and you're like, oh, why did I just move? But at night, I think because you're laying in bed, maybe the flow doesn't feel as heavy, but I still would have to set an alarm in the middle of the night because if I didn't, then I would have to I'd have to change. I don't experience that anymore, but I had that for probably, if I got my period at 13, that would have been until, I probably would say until about my mid 30s, and I'm 42 now.
Wow. So you basically had 20 years of those heavy periods.
Yeah.
I mean, I want to talk more about the rest of your story because, there's obviously a root cause for those heavy periods. Tell me more about what that meant for your relationship with your period.
Oh, it was like hell. When it was coming, and I'm so glad we're having this conversation because I was thinking about this today, because when it would come, it was just hell. I'm like, it's one of those things, people who have Crohn's, they have to always map out where the bathrooms are. That's what was me around my period. So if I I wouldn't schedule dates around the first day of my period, first or second day, because those heavy days would last for about 2. The third day was manageable. The third day I could actually go out and I still have to make sure that I was not pushing it. But the first 2 days were literally would have to definitely scope out a bathroom. So I would try to plan my life around it so I wouldn't have an accident. And I still did have tons of accidents. So my relationship with it was so bad at the time that I just dreaded it. You get the period brain. I think I still get a little bit of period brain when it comes, but not to the degree that it was before.
You did a lot of planning in the first couple of days of your period because of the heaviness. Was it painful as well?
Yeah, it was really painful. I wasn't one of those women who were I've heard of women who they've thrown up. They had horrible headaches. I was luckily that I've never experienced that. I would have cramps, but nothing that was severe, just pretty uncomfortable. A lot of soreness and back pain, but nothing again severe, and just obviously a lot of fatigue because when you're losing that much blood, you're exhausted. But that probably I guess I was lucky in that sense that even though the flow was so heavy, I've met women and have worked with women in practice who've had periods that were light, and absolutely their symptoms were excruciating during PMS. Emotionally, I definitely was like all over the place, where it's just kind of like, I just want a hug and for someone to feed me cake, but then I want to snap your head off and want my own alone time all at the same time. Like, that's kind of that, like, manic sort of behavior. But, I'm lucky in the sense that I didn't struggle from extreme pain like a lot of women.
What was a point where, so after dealing with this for 20 years, and then you perhaps, I guess you got to a point where you were like, okay, something's going on here. Tell me about the point where you realized actually this wasn't right, something was wrong, and you needed to sort things out with your period.
I think I probably would say around my mid-20s is when for the longest time, I just felt it was normal. My mom went through this and my sister went through this, and I'll probably be like my mom and have a hysterectomy, and like, but this is just kind of what happens. But then in my 20s, I'm like, I don't think it's normal. And I didn't really care so much about my health in my earlier 20s, and even throughout my 20s. I don't know how much I really cared about it, because I think that like a lot of people, I felt sort of invincible. I was an ad person. I worked hard. I played even harder. A lot of drugs, lots of alcohol. And so you're not really thinking too much or even correlating that, like, wow, what I'm eating or how I'm taking care of myself is greatly affecting my menstrual cycle every month. So I think that a lot of the things I was doing was just adding insult to injury. It was just making it worse. But I started to go see practitioners, and my number one complaint was always like, I have the hardest, like heaviest period. I just don't know what to do. And I remember seeing a Chinese medical doctor and literally giving her a huge sum of money and just saying, here's a bunch of money, and just start taking like my sessions off this big lump sum of money, and let's start working on this. And when I did cycle charting, it was so erratic. I remember like a cardiograph. And it started to normalize in terms of the way it's supposed to look. When I was doing a lot of like herbs, my periods were still heavy. And she's like, oh, you just have spleen Qi deficiency, and you just got to take these herbs. And I kind of gave up on it, because I felt like, well, I don't really feel like it's like something isn't shifting still. So, which is ironic, because, my background is nutrition and Chinese medicine. And I do think that both are very powerful, but it's also the reason why that I find that like there's more to it than just the one modality. It's why I like, exploring other areas of finding out, well, why is this happening? And what are all these different factors that could be at play here, versus just this one thing that was the reason why that this happened. I'm not entirely sure I believe in that very much, but yeah, I would probably say mid-20s was probably when it was started to become at the forefront. And I had seen multiple practitioners to try to address it, and not one person ran a single test on me, which is interesting. Like, there was no hormone tests, there was no, stool testing, there was no hair trace mineral analysis, there's nothing. It was just protocols after protocols and lots of money spent. And in hindsight, looking back, there's a lot of guessing and no testing.
And that's kind of like the opposite of, I know you talk about testing a lot in your work, so the opposite of what you do now. So as a practitioner, if you could go back and speak to yourself back in your mid-20s, what would you say?
I probably would say, go to somebody who's actually going to go test you, like to really get to the bottom of it. And I think that so many practitioners, even now, like, I'm not saying hormone testing is not valid, because it is, but I also believe that hormones are very much superficial in the fact that so many things affect them. And I think that if we actually address, well, are there gut infections at play? Because if there are, well, those can affect your hormones. And for me, I came from a history of having like really bad skin for so long, and had been on rounds of antibiotics for Lord knows all these respiratory issues, and thinking like, maybe that's probably where you should have started, was just looking at your gut first. And so that's probably what I would have said, is like, go test your gut. Let's start there. And honestly, a huge part that helped me was symptomatically, was natural bioidentical progesterone. And I say symptomatically because I think a lot of women will get on natural bioidentical progesterone and go, this is the answer to all my prayers. Just like taking Vitex is the answer to all their prayers. And I don't believe everyone should be on Vitex. But, yes, progesterone is so needed to calm those heavy periods. And they certainly as hell calmed mine. My periods are still heavy, but they're manageable. And I don't have to plan my washroom route. But why is the progesterone low to begin with? Why is the estrogen high to begin with? And I think everybody sometimes needs a bit of symptomatic support, let's just cut a gal a break. But, you got to keep looking at those causative factors while you're addressing it symptomatically.
Mm. So really going in and giving someone something that's going to provide them with some short-term relief while you go in and you address the kind of deeper issues. I 100% agree with that, because if someone's been going through something for such a long time and they've come to you as a practitioner, you just want to be able to show them that there is a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, 1,000%. And that's why I'm just like, it was a godsend for me. But in the interim, it's just, you keep chipping away at the stuff that's there. And sometimes it's layers of stuff. Sometimes it's not even like, it's just your gut. Well, how about if it's emotional trauma? Even stuff that it could have been there from like before you even had the mental articulation to go like, oh, well, I remember this happening. It might have been something that was even like transgenerational from your family that you're not even consciously aware of. Like, there's so many layers to us as human beings. It's quite remarkable.
I was having a discussion recently about epigenetics and, how we carry trauma in our genes. And I just find that such a fascinating area. And then you combine that with the whole, the hypothesis of racial weathering. And I'm hypothesizing here, but if you just look at something like fibroids, and I know that's an area of focus, one of your areas of focus, and you look at how prevalent they are within Black women, and you just think, okay, well, if we were able to dig deeper, what is going on there? How much weight does intergenerational trauma have to do with, the prevalence of fibroids? I just think it's just fascinating.
It really is, because you think about, and it's what I find fascinating is like, I'm a huge fan of breath work, and I love breath work. And there's so many different modalities of breath work, right? You have Wim Hof that people do, which I don't feel is very esoteric in nature. He's just kind of like, breathe, mother. You know what I mean? I'm not going to swear, but it's like, he's just very like, go get it, And then you have Dr. Stanislav Grof, who does breath work, and there's like all this like music and stuff, and he kind of takes it from like shamanistic areas of it. But he believes like that some trauma can be very much from in utero, or even from the birthing process. Because you think, okay, yeah, it was like really traumatic. Like, my mother couldn't speak English, and you've got nurses yelling at her to push, and she's crying because she has no idea. So how traumatic not only was that for her, but for my sister coming out of her. But that you can't remember that. My mother went through war. She was a Catholic who harbored the Jews in the war, right? Like, you think about this. And so it's interesting. There's a guy by the name of Mark Wolin, and he's fantastic at talking about like traumas that happen through our lifeline, and how it actually could be the reason why like we're reacting the way we are, or even like why we're physically manifesting certain things that we do. I think the Black community, it's so deep rooted, that trauma on so many levels, especially for women. Oh my God. And so I think that the layers are so deep in there, and the beauty of breath work, which is one of the things that I really highly believe into the integration process of somebody. Because I think sometimes you can tell someone, oh, you're healing. But I'm like, but telling someone you're healing makes it sound like you're broken to begin with. Like, you're integrating all these loose puzzle pieces that just need to click together. And when you do breath work, that it's moving the diaphragm, which then moves the lymphatic system. And the lymphatic system is that emotional shock absorber. So there could be like trauma there from God knows when. And so I think that when women are thinking about periods, for example, we have to kind of go beyond the physical part and think that like this actually could be much deeper, and that it's not about abandoning one thing, but really making sure that we value the trauma work as much as we value the supplements. We value the self-parenting and getting our butt to bed at a decent time as much as we value like eating good food. But I think generally people tend to abandon those things because they just don't put as much value or weight in where they should be.
I'm just nodding along with you. I agree with everything you're saying. I think that people, they want a quick fix, and you can take a pill, you can take a supplement, and that will give you the quick relief that we were talking about earlier. But that integrational work that you were talking about, that is the work. That's the deep work that can take months, can take years to really go through the layers of, what is actually driving this. And I think that people can be afraid of that because it pulls up so many things that they haven't really wanted to deal with.
Yeah. And it's interesting because when it does come up, is it important for us to mentally articulate the why? Like if you experience something, did you experience it first in your mind, or did you experience first in terms of like, well, no, when I experienced something, this is how I felt it first. I felt an energetic resonance. Then our brain makes the mental articulation of what that meant. So sometimes when women say to me, I'm doing the breath work and I feel so sad and I feel so angry, and they're trying to articulate the why, and I wasn't held enough as a child, or this one, and I'm like, does it matter? Like maybe we just need to release that stored emotion that's been sitting there that is causing us to react in so many ways. Like allow yourself to feel, but people don't want to feel because it's uncomfortable, right? So I think it's just all those things I think are really ingrained and deeply stored into the human psyche. Like I woke up or was trying to go to bed and I don't even know why, but I felt angry. I had this feeling of anger in me, and I don't know why. Nothing caused me to feel that way. And I could not for the life of me go to bed because of it. So I got up and I sat down and I did 15 minutes of breath work. And partway through it, I started bawling my eyeballs out. And I had no idea why. And I still think, maybe I just not meant to know why. Maybe it's okay that I just released it. Like, do I need to ration it? Do I need to create a perception of what it was and how or why? Like maybe it was just important that I just let go, So I think that, yes, when it comes to periods, it's any part of your hormonal healing. You got to look deeper.
I want to go back a little bit and talk about your story and your journey to where you are today, because you have quite an interesting story. You were saying about working in advertising, playing hard, working hard. I used to work in advertising as well. So as you were talking about that, I was like, yeah, get it. Got it. You used to have been there. But then you had a really dramatic experience. Can you share kind of an abbreviated version of that story for listeners who aren't familiar with it?
Yeah, so I left advertising. I started to actually kind of dabble in the healing realm around that time, studied nutrition, and left advertising to fully pursue it. And after that point, I was really interested in Chinese medicine. But when I went into that whole field of nutrition and Chinese medicine, I went into it with the idea of like digestion. Like that was kind of my thing for the longest time. And it still is, right? It's usually where I like to start. But fast forward down the road, I had an ovarian cyst that had ruptured. This was years and years after my studying. And I was graduated from Chinese medicine school, but I had an ovarian cyst that ruptured. It tore off a piece of my right ovary, and I got sent to hospital, and I had no idea what was going on. All I knew that I was in a severe amount of pain. My abdomen was distended. I was thinking in my head, I'm like, the pain isn't fixed. It's like moving left to right. Maybe it's my appendix, and all the diagnostic thing in my head. And they said, well, we have to do a CT scan. They did, and they said, we can't see anything other than blood, and it's right up to your lung cavity. And it's the reason why that you can't breathe very well right now, because blood outside of your organs is an irritant to your organs, and it hurts because you're supposed to be in your vessels and your capillaries and your veins. And so, it was up to there, and they said, we have to do an exploratory surgery to find out what it is. They did a 6-inch vertical incision. They took out about 2 liters of blood, which was a lot. And they had me for over an hour or two of surgery or so. And they had like 4 of the best surgeons in there from different walks of life, because they didn't know what they were going to see. The ovarian cyst had ruptured, tore off a piece of my ovary. They stitched my ovary back and said, it's fine. It's in good working order. Side note, we didn't see any endo that was in there. And it was months of recovery. I had 24 staples in me. And it took me a while to recover. It was really, really challenging. And so that's when I started kind of getting into the hormonal area, obviously spurred from that. And then from there, fast forward even further, found out that I had fibroids by mistake, because I was experiencing very weird sensations in my pelvic region, not understanding, I'm like, is it an ovarian cyst? I don't know. And then I went into the hospital, and luckily the radiologist was still there, did an ultrasound. And then the doctor said, we didn't find anything. Did you want a copy of your ultrasound reports? I said, sure. Grabbed it really sleepy, stuffed it in my purse. Next day, looked at my purse and opened up the results and said, 2 fibroids, 1 intramural, 1 subserosal. And I'm like, you wouldn't think to tell a woman who came in experiencing pelvic pain that she has like a couple of fibroids, probably a good thing, right? That's why it felt weird, because I, unlike a lot of women, felt my fibroids, and I have one that's shrinking right now. And so I had later discovered that I had Hashimoto's, an autoimmune thyroid condition. And who knows how long I had that maybe it hadn't been diagnosed for years. It takes about 10 years for Hashimoto's to develop. And I say that because it's not like, okay, well, one day you just get an autoimmune condition, but your thyroid can really change your periods quite a bit, your thyroid's function. So who knows how long I had it for so long, and maybe that was something that needed to be addressed too, but I never really had proper blood work, which is an ongoing issue for so many women to get complete blood work, and they're just told that they're normal or that it's all up in their heads. So I'd experienced that and had a bunch of thyroid nodules, and through a lot of work that I've done, my last ultrasound, which I always show on the master classes I've done, on one side, all the nodules are completely clear. And then the one that I had that was 1 millimeter away from getting biopsied shrunk down by 50%.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was like, I always tell them, and I'm like, and my antibodies are almost at normal right now, which is insane. And I say to women, I'm like, it's 1,000% possible to get past these things, but it's not about being consistent. Consistency is BS in my opinion. It's about being committed. You're never going to stray for something that you're committed to. Consistency, you tell women to be consistent, and her little perfectionist brain starts going mental. And when she's not consistent, it's like shame follows and haunts her to death. Versus commitment's like, well, I'm going to always go back to something I'm committed to. And eventually all those slip ups I do are less and less. And when I do, I kind of have a little bit of grace with myself,
You have been through a lot. So you had the heavy periods, and then you had the surgery from the ruptured cysts. Then you found out that you had fibroids, and then you got diagnosed with Hashimoto's, and then the thyroid nodules. And you tell me if I'm wrong, but from what I see of you, you seem like you're thriving. And all of that would have put someone else on the floor. So what listeners will probably be thinking is, well, what are her secrets? How did she do it? Can you talk more about what you did on your healing journey and what you're still doing?
Yeah, I think that, I was the gal who, when I commit to something, I was like, yeah, I'm going to go full throttle. And I think when I did really dive into health, food wise, I was always on point. I was always on point with that. I had a lot of struggles with addiction for quite some time, but I think the biggest challenge for me was the lifestyle. The sleep was something that I would eat well, I'd drink enough water, I'd work out, but like sleep, I'll sleep when I'm dead. I will work and I will work hard because it's where I get validation, right? Like a lot of people, they get validation through the work that they do. And so that was the hardest part to integrate, was the sleep, was crushing the codependent patterns, the need to people please, to validate my sense of self-worth, to distract myself from feeling, because, hey, if I can make someone else feel good, then I've done a good job. I think that those are really huge catalysts, and definitely addressing the trauma. And from a food perspective, you know, I'm a huge fan of looking at the gut, and I had a lot of gut infections that were at play. That was something that I noticed. And I ended up I was in Bali last year for 5 weeks. Prior to going to Bali, I started to experience some pretty intense gut pain, and realized it was from an H. pylori infection that I had. And H. pylori, for the listeners listening, is the same bacterial infection that creates peptic ulcers, and it's found in 2/3 of the world's population. And there's studies to even show that women who have very low levels of progesterone tend to actually have a higher incidence of H. pylori, because progesterone is also anti-inflammatory in nature. And so we also need progesterone for thyroid health. People who have thyroid conditions also sometimes has H. pylori. And when you have H. pylori, you don't have much stomach acid. So it's like a welcome party for all bacteria and parasites to come into your gut. So it was no surprise that I had all this gut pain. I didn't have Bali belly. It was because of that. I ended up thinking to myself, why does it hurt after I eat almost all my meals except for breakfast? And then I realized breakfast was the only meal that was all protein. So I decided, I went on this whole quest to kind of go, and I say this like loosely, but carnivore-ish. And I say carnivore-ish because I was not full carnivore, and I don't label myself as carnivore, but a meat-based diet. And it was literally like someone just turned off the switch to pain, like that. And all the gut pain was gone. It was so bad that I thought I was trying to get a flight home. I was reeling in pain for 5-6 hours because it was so intense. And I just stuck to eating. Like now I think my diet, I would say, is pretty high fat, but I do eat vegetables and fruit. But when I took the Cyrex test, which is a food intolerance test, it's done by blood, I was intolerant to a ton of foods. But you're not intolerant to a ton of foods until you understand why. And usually it's from gut infections. So yeah, I went carnivore-ish, meaning I still eat, berries and apples or pears sometimes, but my diet is primarily protein and pretty high fat. And it has been an absolute godsend for my gut. It's been an absolute godsend for my thyroid and my hormone levels. But the breath work has been huge. The sleep has been huge. The bigger boundaries has been massive. Like that's where a big part of my healing really was. And working out, where I'm like, I'm going to rest today and I'm not going to feel guilty about it. Like, I don't want to do high impact workouts. You will never catch me at a boot camp or a cycling class. Like, I would rather die than to do those. Like, I will do what my body feels is best for it. And for me, that's usually like a yoga or a Pilates, where it's not a high impact thing. So that's probably the secret sauces are in multiple parts.
Going back to what you're saying about being on a carnivore-ish diet, I know that some people listening will think, whoa, eating all that meat, that's, bad for the environment. We get told that meat is so bad for us. I have my own view on that, as in that there's no one size fits all. You've got to do what's right for you. But what I'm sure you heard, if you talked about this publicly, I don't know if you talk about what you eat publicly, but what has been your response to people who are kind of like, what the way you're eating is wrong?
I always say one size fits all approach doesn't work. I I also say the results are in the pudding because look at my numbers. It's improved. I think that meat has the highest bioavailable nutrients other than plants. So I think that there's that. I grew up in a meat-based household. My family is Brazilian. Like, you can't get more meat-based than that. But I whether it's bad for the environment, I think that you have to vote with your dollar. And I think that if you're buying, I don't buy commercially raised meat. I purchase organic and grass-fed. I also switch up my protein sources. My favorite is beef, but sometimes I try to get what's local, where I'm right now, they're going to have a lot of elk and venison. So I try to switch up because you're getting more nutrients from different animals. And also I try to get in some organ meats as well. I think that we strayed so much away from, like, people will rant and rave about how bad things are for the environment when there's like monocropping of soy and corn going on. I'm like, you don't understand the amount of wildlife that has actually been killed by the growing of, plant-based foods. And again, I'm not demonizing plants at all, but I'm also, I think that organic and grass-fed farming can be extremely regenerative to the environment. A lot of people don't realize, but with fruits and vegetables, you require blood meal. So there's actual animal fragments in there to grow those. So a lot of people I know that they're like, it was bad for the hormones because of this. And I'm like, but what is? Because if you look at the estrogen and that it is in grass-fed organic meat, and then you compare that to the estrogen levels in soy or even other various things, you're going to see massive difference. There's a lot of different differences in that. My issues haven't gotten worse. My issues have only gotten better. They've only improved. But I don't subscribe to diet dogma. So that's why I say carnivore-ish, because sometimes, I will, do I ever eat grains? Rarely. I mean, one day out of the blue, I was like, I really want oatmeal. I never freaking eat oatmeal. I don't remember the last time I ate it, but I bought some and I made some. Oh my God, is the world crashing? No. But that day, my body really wanted it. So I had some. I didn't feel terrible after eating it, which is a bonus, but I think that sometimes the dogma of various eating regimes, even carnivore, can be so extreme. It's something. And I think that we've strayed so much away from like food that back in the day when people ate meat, they ate, like, especially in Brazil, you're talking about people who were slaves, who were poor. They ate every single part of the animal because they had to. They looked at, and that's why even now it's like, if I can eat some organs, I will. And for those that I know that I'm not going to like kidney, I think it's gross because just personal taste preference. I will end up probably getting that in desiccated form from various supplement companies to supplement what I have, because you're getting a lot of those micronutrients. I think that eating muscle meats alone, you're really straying from that. Like, even if I'm making a stew, I'll put bone in there because I know I'm going to get the collagen from that. Like when my dad made, it's a Brazilian dish called feijoada, and feijoada was like actually from the African slaves in Brazil who would make it, and they would make it from every part of the animal. It was a bean dish with lots of meat. And I remember when my dad made it when we were kids, you make it for a big amount of people, and there's like, there's ear, there's tongue, there's like a hoof in there, like there's everything that's in there. But you kind of grew up and thinking, oh, that's just normal. This is what we eat, right? But now everyone wants this pretty cellophane packaging, and I'm like, that's so far from what it is, So yeah, I definitely try to respect as much as humanly possible from the animal.
I am nodding along because I'm in this world, and I agree with what you're saying. But what we hear from a lot of mainstream health people is, vegan is best, vegetarian is best, and you and I both know, we both said it, there's no one size fits all. So I'd say for listeners who are confused about what to eat, it goes back to listening to what your body is telling you. So Melissa said, she craved oatmeal. So she went and got some oatmeal. Really tune in to the signals and the signs of your bodies, and don't feel like you have to stick to these templates just because, some influencer is saying everyone should be vegan. That might not be right for you. I feel so passionately about that.
Oh, I totally agree. Because even, I have some patients of mine who do really well with, higher vegetable counts. I do believe that most women are probably not eating enough protein. As we age, our muscles break down. We need the protein for, blood sugar balancing. And unfortunately, when you're vegetarian and vegan, you have to combine various foods, starches, legumes, etc. A lot of these foods have a lot of anti-nutrients in them, like lectins, things that prevent the assimilation of those nutrients. And that high starch can be very problematic for a lot of people, especially for insulin levels. So is that protein combining actually right for you? And I think that has to be a really integral part before someone really commits to a specific diet. Like, is it right for you?
So look at what's right for you. So tell listeners more about what you're up to now in your business. I know you've got a lot of things going on. Tell us what's coming up for you.
Yeah, so right now, we have a membership that has been running, for probably about 5 years or so. Sexy Lady Balls. Everything I do is kind of kitschy. So if you find me on Instagram and you see Sexy Food Therapy, you're going to go, wow, this girl just dressed up as a big vulva. That's me. Or a big fibroid. Yes, that's me. And I like to have people to laugh and learn some of these very complex topics. So we have this membership called Sexy Lady Balls. Lady Balls referring to your ovaries. And there's women from all walks of life in there. And it's great because we have women there, whether they have fibroids. Like, we really specialize mainly in those estrogen dominant conditions, the fibroids, the the adenomyosis, the ovarian cyst, the polycystic ovarian syndrome. And there's so many women in the program, in the membership, who have thyroid conditions. And pretty much all of them across the board are struggling with their adrenals. So it's not to say we don't have women in menopause, because we do. But that's, a huge part of my work. And I'm in the process of developing something that's not going to release for a while, not until probably the fall of 2021. It's an autoimmune program. And, but right now is Sexy Lady Balls. And at some point I got to get my book together. So, that's a labor of love, but, that's kind of where I'm at right now. And it's been extremely fruitful and amazing and wonderful to chat with women and to support them, because I think, especially with hormonal work, it's not like okay, you did this for 30 days and you're healed. It's, you want to give them ongoing support, which is why the membership has been created. And that's really where, these women join at a really low priced monthly fee. And then they have the opportunity to upgrade to get testing. And my job is to really fight tooth and nail to try to get them to get complete blood work. So we have women in there from Australia, from, all parts of Europe, from the States and to Canada. And I want these women to get answers. Like, that to me is my number one goal, because like I said, who knows if I had thyroid issues in my 20s and 30s and it was just undetected, and that's why I think especially blood work is so key. So we try to make sure that we get resources for women so that they get answers.
So if someone's listening and they're thinking, how do I fight to get the right blood work done with my doctor? How do I have that conversation with my doctor? What would you say?
I think that the hardest part is, I don't think it should be a fight. If you're having a fight, then I think that it's time to look elsewhere and to just, manage your energy accordingly, so you're not pushing up the stream. I think it's important to look to work with an alternative care practitioner, whether it's someone like myself, a naturopath, a functional nutritionist, what have you, who may have those resources for you. And usually those resources will require you to pay out of pocket to get testing. Now, in the States, people are used to paying always out of pocket for their health. In Canada, it's like, oh, well, go into the doctor and just get blood work done and we're good. You kind of feel like it's free, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes I find that that's probably the most challenging to work with are my fellow Canadians. But, I say, I'm like, you got I think there's a weird thing, especially with women, about investing in themselves, that it's like, and I'm not talking about fashion, and they might be like, I invest in myself all the time on Amazon. Sure. But is that actually investing in yourself? Like something that's going to be like fruitful and abundant to your body? Like, are they distractions or are they actual investments? Right? Like, are you spending or are you investing? Because those are two very different things. But most women really struggle with investing in themselves. They'll and that's why we try to keep the membership rate low. And then we have upgrades for stool testing and all the rest. And even that I try to keep as low as humanly possible. But yeah, it definitely comes to a distraction issue, a self-worth issue. And these, again, come down to those very deep core patterns that I think a lot of women have so deeply ingrained that are a huge part of why they're struggling and then still looking for that pill to fix everything.
So for listeners who they've heard everything you've said, but what would you want that one thought that they would take away to be?
I would say probably the biggest one thought would be, if you're struggling and you're confused and you're overwhelmed, I think that sometimes you have to let go and seek the help of somebody. And if you seek the help of somebody and they haven't done any testing, that should be a red flag to you. I think that you also have to be mindful and think, like, is there trauma that's here? Is there codependent issues that are here? Like, sometimes something as small as like just getting your butt to bed earlier. I said this to my husband all the time. I'm like, man, if more women just got sleep, so many other issues would improve. Ask yourself these questions. Ask yourself these hard questions. Because when you're really sleep deprived, you're going to want to eat everything on your fridge. You're going to think that you suck. Never trust your thoughts in a tired brain. I don't care if you are the most evolved human being. I still say that to myself to this day. So remember to say that to yourself. Like, I'm really beating myself up today. Am I tired? Yes. Okay. I can admit that I'm tired. Cool. Never trust my thoughts in a tired brain. Got it. Cool. So I would say that probably, but I would always say, like, when it comes to your health, the number one thing is like, start with your lifestyle first. Because you can eat all the amazing foods, but man, if your lifestyle sucks, you're never going to stay on plan. That's why most people have fallen off the bandwagon. It's just because you don't have a food problem, man. You have a lifestyle problem. So that probably would be where I would leave people with.
So look at your lifestyle, look at your sleep, look at your trauma. I think amazing. Thank you so much. You've brought so much to this conversation. I'm so thrilled to have you on the show. Listeners can find you on Instagram, on your website. So it's Sexy Food Therapy. And all the links will be in the show notes. Thank you so much, Melissa.
My pleasure. Thank you.
For more inspiring conversations, head over to periodstorypod.com, where we have so many more for you to peruse. If you want help with your menstrual or hormone health, email me on hello@eatlovemove.com to set up a free 30-minute hormone health review. If you like today's show, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Tag us, come say hi, and send in your requests for who you'd like to see on the show on Instagram and Twitter on @periodstorypod, or email us at hello@periodstorypod.com. I'm Lenise Brothers, and you've been listening to Period Story. Thank you so much for listening.